So the key to winning a POTS claim is supportive medical records with your history of symptoms and functionality, objective testing of the diagnosis, objective testing that supports the RFC, potentially trying to meet the listings, figuring out backwards why you can't do your past work, and then making sure that we've got the symptoms and functionality that are true and accurate, but would preclude you from doing that past relevant work. If you're under 50, we have to show that you can't do even sedentary work, that there's been what we call an erosion of your ability to do that because of the need to alternate sitting and standing, naps, fatigue issues, concentration issues, pace issues, attendance issues. But ultimately, to win, we have to show basically less than sedentary, that you can only do simple, routine, repetitive tasks, and that the kind of work you can do is what we call unskilled, which is basically McDonald level type work. If you're over 50, we have to show sedentary and no skills. And again, just the words I'm using should be clues and keys to you that you need a lawyer to represent you in this case, because you probably didn't fully understand what we have to prove for PRW or other work, sedentary, unskilled work, transferable skills, all terms of art in a Social Security case. So let's talk about ME/CFS. They don't understand the term ME/CFS. They don't understand the symptoms. They don't understand autoimmune issues, and they don't understand the potential listings for impairments. So ME/CFS is a complex medical condition. It can be caused by infections, immune system challenges, stress, and possibly a genetic link. I will say to you, if there's any good thing that has come out of COVID, it is that ME/CFS cases are getting much more attention, and there's a lot of scientific attention being directed to the COVID virus, which is helping with the diagnosis and potential treatment of ME/CFS. There is no gold standard test for a diagnosis of ME/CFS. It's based on history and physical exam. It's sort of a diagnosis of elimination, much like fibromyalgia was back in the day. What is a primary symptom? Drop in activity level along with fatigue that lasts 6 months. The nature of the fatigue is important. So if you're having fatigue issues, it's the nature of the fatigue issue. It could be that you have unrestful sleep. You have to take naps. When you wake up, you feel like you're in a fog. So it's the nature of the fatigue that's important, that is being described in your medical records. Traditionally, you'll see a worsening of ME/CFS symptoms after physical or mental activity that wouldn't have caused a problem before the illness. It's known as post-exertional malaise. One of the ways that we measure it, particularly in my ERISA disability cases, is with something called a CPET exam, a cardiac pulmonary exercise test. And in the right case, we'll use that test, generally not in a pure Social Security case. ME/CFS is also associated with sleep issues. So those sleep issues should be documented, including, again, the nature of the sleep problems, whether you are using any kind of a CPAP, how compliant you are. I know that CPAP is associated with breathing issues, but again, Social Security tends to associate sleep problems with other sleep disorders, and they always jump to we want to know if your person is, using a mask. And in the diagnosis process, the diagnosis is also predicated on one of the two following symptoms: problems with thinking and memory, and worsening of symptoms when standing or sitting upright, back to our orthostatic intolerance. So you can see there's a lot of overlap between these. And when I'm dealing with a case, I'm trying to figure out, do I have a pure POTS case? Do I have an autoimmune disorder case? Do I have an ME/CFS case, or do I have a combination of them? Because I want to be developing the necessary medical evidence and the appropriate residual functional capacity for them. ME/CFS is seen with other common symptoms: pain in muscle and joints, headaches, digestive issues, irregular heartbeat, muscle weakness, shortness of breath, some of which are consistent with fibromyalgia. Now, Many people with ME/CFS have autoimmune conditions like fibromyalgia, and they'll have POTS. But again, it's not, and I don't mean autonomic POTS. I mean basically autoimmune generated POTS. Someone, for example, who has MS. So again, sorting all of this out is important for Social Security purposes, because if I have a client who has multiple medical issues, or we're not quite clear in the diagnosis, I want to be arguing as many medical conditions as I can. So the key to winning an ME/CFS claim are the exam findings and symptoms consistent with the diagnosis, the treatment by a specialist. And in all of these cases, I will tell you, if you're just treating with a garden variety physician as opposed to a specialist, that will not help your case. The Social Security Administration, and particularly judges, expect that you're being seen by an expert. In an ME/CFS case, we, again, in select cases, will do the pulmonary exercise testing. And in select cases, we'll do neurocognitive testing that will support the complaints of problems with memory dysfunction. There is no listing for ME/CFS. So again, you're not going to win at step 3, much like POTS, you're generally not going to win at step 3. Step 4 and 5 are the same keys. Can't do past relevant work. Step 5, under 50, less than sedentary, simple, routine, repetitive, unskilled work. Over 50, sedentary, but no transferable skills. And again, as I'm listening and reading records, I'm trying to translate to how I can develop a winning theory to get my clients their benefits based in part on their age. Small fiber neuropathy. Again, we are seeing increased cases of small fiber neuropathy, particularly post-COVID. And Social Security really doesn't get SFN for the same reasons. They don't understand the terms, the symptoms, the causes, or potential listings. And so, again, I think it's helpful to step back. What is small fiber neuropathy? It is a disease, if you will, or neuropathy caused primarily by diabetes, but autoimmune disorders, Sjogren's, scardosis, some neoplastic syndrome diseases. And again, I'm looking for the diagnosis. The symptoms of SFN include pain and burning in the feet, trunk, or arms, electric shock level pain, lightheadedness, blood pressure will drop when sitting or standing up, loss of consciousness, sweating, gastroenterological issues. I am always, when I'm hearing these symptoms of pain and burning in the feet, trunk, or arms, going to, how does that impact a person's ability to sit? Can they sit 6 out of 8 hours? Do they have to get up? Do they have to move around? What do they do to address this electric shock level pain? Are they taking medications like, for example, gabapentin? And what are the side effects of that medication? Is it working, not working? Does it make them a little slow cognitively? Does it knock them out in terms of making them sleepy? So I want to develop, when I hear those types of things, the impact on a person's ability to sit, and certainly their ability to use their hands individually, right hand together, or hands together. Why? Sedentary jobs are based on this. That is the continual use of your hands in a bilateral manner, be it typing, be it one finger typing, if you will, manipulating things, assembling things, rolling silverware in that nice cloth napkin, holding a pen and writing things. Okay, now in small fiber neuropathy, there are RFC forms potentially that we've developed, but there's also a listing level impairment at 11.14 rather. You have to have motor function tests, EMGs, nerve conduction study tests, scans, that sort of thing. And for those of you who've had EMG and nerve conduction study tests, you know they're not particularly pleasant tests. Same key, past relevant work, other work. That's the game in these claims. And you always have to be thinking by each medical condition, how do I get a person to less than sedentary if they're under 50, or sedentary if they're 50 or over? Mast cell activation syndrome. Social Security doesn't understand it. they tend, particularly in my experience with judges, they're kind of glossing over it. They think it's sort of a basic allergic reaction, but they don't get the full nature of that reaction. So I'm spending a lot of time in trial with my clients, making sure we're talking about the symptoms and then talking about the combination, if you will. Mast cell activation syndrome really wasn't recognized by the CDC before 2017. And it occurs when mast cells, which are allergy cells responsible for immediate allergic reactions, trigger that reaction or an inflammatory response. And basically, the mast cells are secreting certain chemicals, if you will, that are being generated or triggered in response to whatever the particular pathogen is. What happens is these mediators are basically being released too frequently, and they're causing allergic reaction in various body systems: the skin, the nervous system, the cardiovascular, and the digestive system. And too often, Social Security and the judges tend to think that it's just a reaction on the skin, when in fact it's a multi-system reaction. And that's why I want that well documented in the medical records and well explained by my clients. So symptoms are chronic fatigue, itching and watering of eyes, nasal problems, shortness of breath, recurrent arrhythmias, low blood pressure, syncope, and POTS-like symptoms. So many times we're going to have an overlap of symptoms, but we may not have, for example, a POTS diagnosis. In POTS, we don't always have mast cell activation syndrome, though I see them a lot together. They're just not always presenting that way. Now, what I'm also seeing, and my colleagues are seeing, are Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, POTS, and the mast cell activation syndrome occurring together. Ehlers Danlos, as I will talk about in a moment, is a congenital disease, but for some reason, particularly post-COVID, I'm seeing a presentation of an activation of Ehlers Danlos syndrome, and certainly we're seeing POTS and MCAS. And so it's not uncommon to see it with autoimmune disorders, but I'm also seeing it in presentation or combination with genetic conditions. There is no listing. The applicable listings can include an immune listing 1406 if we've got two body systems involved, one system moderately involved, and at least two of the following: severe fatigue, fever, malaise, or involuntary weight loss. Now, there can be other applicable listings based on other involved body systems, but when I have mast cell, I'm looking at listing 14.06. Again, what's the key? It's going to be those medical records with symptoms and system involvement. So you should be thinking about, okay, I have skin issues. Here are what they are. I have digestive issues. Here are what they are. Then I have everything else. Here are those symptoms. This is how it impacts my ability to function. So we're looking to break down in detail each one of these medical conditions in terms of symptoms and functionality, identifying the right RFC form, and then trying to work it in, if possible, to a listing. COVID-19. There are lots of things that Social Security does not get about COVID. I just tried one of the first COVID cases in Florida in April, won it. But before the hearing got started, and in this case, I had 5 different kinds of RFC forms. Before we went on the record, the judge said, look, Social Security has no position paper on this. They've given us no direction as to how we're supposed to evaluate this condition. What do you think I should do? And I said to him, I said, look, COVID clearly causes immunological issues. So let's evaluate any immunological issues or diagnoses that we think exist. It causes pulmonary issues. So if my client's got pulmonary issues, let's evaluate those. They've got cardiac issues. They've got digestive issues. So basically, I suggested to the judge that we back into this based on either the diagnosis or the system involvement, which is why I had the RFC forms. Ultimately, the judge agreed with me, and we won this case. So right now, I'm trying to do a lot of education of the judges in my memo of law or in my opening statement about how they should be evaluating a COVID case or a COVID complicated long-term COVID case. Now, I will tell you, they want to see a COVID-19 diagnosis, and that can be hard because particularly in the beginning, there were a lot of false positives. I can sometimes get around that based on sort of a post COVID-19 analysis of the medical records. And what I mean by that, when you look at the history that the person gives about their symptoms, how those symptoms progressed, and then what post-COVID, in quotes, body systems were involved. But let's say I have a client who has significant pulmonary issues. We obviously had to submit documentation regarding the underlying COVID diagnosis, but we were submitting pulmonary function tests to document the complications that he was having from a pulmonary standpoint. So again, you got to look individually and collectively at these medical conditions and develop the right medical history and RFC form. I will tell you, I think that POTS cases and COVID cases do take more preparation of the client because there are just potentially so many more symptoms. In other cases, I have a lot of overlap of symptoms. So when I've got overlapping conditions, I'm spending time with my clients trying to help them sort out what the disabling symptoms are. When I have combination cases, I try to silo them to begin with, if you will, and then in the medical records and in testimony, develop how each works individually and then in combination. Okay, Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. They don't necessarily get what it is. Listings are a little easier for them, but it clearly is not an autoimmune disorder. It's a genetic disorder. It impacts the collagen, and as a result, that impacts your skin, your blood vessels, your joints. It can result in hypermobility and over-flexible joints that results in dislocation. Any joint can potentially move beyond its normal range of motion. So I just tried a case last week, which is an EDS case, and this person would have chronically dislocated ribs. He would just roll over, and she would also have dislocated joints in her fingers, and she would have joint dislocation issues with her hips. So obviously, I'm talking and developing the medical records and the RFC forms to address the finger issue, manipulation. We're dealing with the ribs because that deals with postural issues, hip, the ability to sit. So again, not to be repetitive, it really is important that we're addressing those kinds of symptoms that would impact your ability to do even a sedentary job. The diagnosis is made using the Brighton score test and the nature of your symptoms. Social Security is going to want to see that. They're going to want to see this hypermobility, subluxation, and injuries caused by subluxation. There's no EDS listing, but as you can see here, there are at least 6 potential listings for an EDS claim. And the key to winning, again, is the test, the Brighton score testing, the family history of EDS, the development of the symptoms, examples of dislocations and injuries. And in this case, I do use family or friend statements more readily and photos and video because it's hard to fake a dislocated or subluxated limb. So I've given you a lot of information. Hopefully you found this educational. I have written a lot of books on Social Security, and I do a lot of disease-specific posts and web pages that are available for you. I do an ERISA podcast called Winning Isn't Easy, and I do disease segments. I've done a whole episode on POTS, by the way. It's from the perspective of an ERISA disability claim, but I think it's also helpful for anyone who has a Social Security claim.